welcome to episode 24 of the Hard Truth About B2B eCommerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm here with my co-host, Tim. So, take it away, Tim.
Hey, everybody. I'm Timothy Peterson. I'm co-hosting with Isaiah Bollinger here on Hard Truth About B2B eCommerce, and I want to make sure we give a big shout out to our sponsor, Punch Out To Go. They're a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. Punch Out To Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. And with their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for punch-out catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents. Thank you once again to Punch Out To Go.
Absolutely, and actually, we're going to bring them back up again in this talk because they're very relevant to one of the slides here. So we got a special episode. It's just me and Tim today, so no guest, but I think you'll find this really valuable. We actually put our minds together. We've been doing this for over 20 episodes, and I think Tim, I'm speaking for you a little bit, but I've learned a lot about B2B e-commerce. Obviously, we came into this knowing a lot. That's why we did it, but just from all the guests, I think we've seen a lot, and there's some commonalities, and I've learned a lot. I don't know about you, but
I have learned a lot as well. I have to say, one of the things I was saying to a friend of mine recently is that, when you stop learning, you might as well be done with your career. So I have to say, I'm continually learning, and this is great stuff. There's so much happening in B2B e-commerce now, and our guests have been phenomenal. And I think that this is going to be fun for a lot of our listeners to just get a little bit of a recap and, maybe a new way to look ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like you said, there's so much going on right now with B2B e-commerce. 10 years ago, there wasn't quite as much going on with the platforms and the ecosystem. And I think right now there's so much going on and innovation happening that it's a lot to keep up with, which is why we've been able to learn so much from all the different guests, So yeah, let's get into it. So Tim, I think this is your take, and I'll get into the later slides.
Absolutely. So setting the stage here for folks, I think some of these things are obvious, but they still need to be said to really let them sink in. But B2B is huge and growing. It's not just something that's big that we're contending with. It's huge and continuing to grow. And here are some of the numbers that are just astounding. Here, by the numbers, look, total B2B global sales estimated over $17 trillion. That's with a T. B2B global digital sales, $9 trillion. And total just US B2B e-commerce sales, over $1 trillion. Astounding numbers. Really, what's the valuation of Amazon at this point? About $1 trillion. So
yeah,
that's pretty serious dollars to contend with in the growth of B2B.
Yeah, and these numbers, I think if you do some research, you'll find all sorts of different numbers because I think it's actually kind of hard to estimate this stuff. Since sometimes is it really a B2B order or is it a B2C order? But the I think the point here is it's a lot of money going through these B2B channels, and a lot of that is moving towards digital and e-commerce. And there's still obviously a lot offline, but we're seeing that kind of all really it's all shifting towards online. So that shift is pretty massive in terms of the speed that's happening.
It's extraordinary. It really is extraordinary. I mean, I have to say, I feel like I'm just old enough. I've lived through a lot of really astounding, moments like that first .com boom, and then, the birth of mobile, and then everything was happening with social. This is another one of those moments, right? I really feel like there's a whole shift of what's going on in B2B. That's pretty extraordinary.
Where commerce will be online, right? Like instead, you don't call up and it takes forever to find out what's going on. You just go online and buy it, right?
But I want to fax. I want to just fax everything. What am I supposed to do?
So yeah, let's keep going. And this is definitely we've gotten into this a lot in the podcast, so we've learned a lot, I think, about this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is something that, again, our listeners are going to be familiar with this to an extent, but let's say this is your first episode and you're coming in here at episode 24. One thing I think everyone realizes too, once they start letting this all sink in, is that, B2B isn't B2C. There are certainly things that overlap and things that kind of contribute to each other, but B2B has its own ecosystem. And I think the next slide will help illustrate that a little bit too. Think about the platforms. Some of these you're going to know no matter whether you do B2B or B2C, but really a lot of these you're not going to be using in the B2C world. You're really going to be using them like, Punch Out to Go Technology, again, our sponsor, think about their applications in the B2B world and how critical they are. It's not necessarily the same sort of thing that you're thinking about when you're, running a smaller or very different kind of B2C, let's say apparel or health and beauty site.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these ERP systems like Infor has a distribution system and a manufacturing. They have all these different like B2B specific, platforms. And then even Magento has a B2B module now. That's fairly new, and they've invested into the B. So all these platforms are investing into B2B specific things. And I think, 5-10 years ago, that wasn't really the case from an e-commerce standpoint. And like you said, it's evolving so rapidly that even a few years ago, I feel like it's very different. I think
it is. It is. I mean, that's, again, it's not just casual observation or you don't even have to take our words for it, right? I think if you just start talking to people who are working in different B2B companies and just their experience about how things are going right now, things are changing very dramatically, and it is really a last 3 to 5 year window. I think it's a fair number where there's been this extraordinary shift, this change, the more options, maybe is another way to put it, more options to consider when you're working ahead.
Definitely. So yeah, the lesson learned is, you got to pick the right platforms, and they should be, B2B oriented platforms that kind of have the use cases that you need, like, maybe it's customer specific pricing or request a quote or whatever it may be that kind of helps you with your operations. That's the thing about B2B that's so complex, is a lot of it depends on the company,
Well, and I think you just led into, another big topic for us. It's one that's on the next slide, really, is that, B2B needs a champion. And really, what does that mean? I mean, it is complex. There's a lot of stuff that's changed, a lot of stuff that's recent. Well, the champion is someone who's an internal expert, right? They do the strategy, the requirement gathering. They have expertise in, one or more platforms. I would say it'd have to be more than one. Managing internal stakeholders, I'd circle that in red and put stars around it if this were on paper. I think that's a critical piece of the puzzle here. If you're not fully digitized and you're not really taking full advantage of this e-commerce revolution in B2B, and the internal stakeholder needs to manage internal stakeholders around them, really help everybody understand what this all means, how it works, how things fit together. And what that means too is managing all these agencies and third parties, managing product data, huge topic. We've talked about that extensively on our podcast. Really understanding content, because the content needs are different for B2B. You don't really have white papers when you're talking about, selling Heinz ketchup so much, right? If you're selling directly to a consumer, but if you're doing some of the other things that B2B players are doing, you might need a white paper to really explain what's going on there. And then last, of course, an internal champion to really deal with the project management aspect of things and the very unique needs of digital marketing and SEO for B2B e-commerce.
Absolutely. So, and I think that this was a big one, a big topic, in that I think it was pretty, maybe in the first 10 episodes or so, it kept coming up where we talked to, I think it was Lone, who works at an agency, and then a few other people, and they all were very adamant that you got to have that strong internal person, or things kind of fall apart because there's no one driving the ship, or, steering the car, the flying the plane, right? Like,
all of those things, because you have to do all of those, right?
Yeah, it kind of just goes off the rails. So, and I think the problem that companies face is that a lot of B2B companies, they they probably need to hire for this person because, you could try and elevate someone into this role, but that can be risky if they don't really have a lot of experience in this and you're just kind of like throwing them into the deep end, and then they're kind of set up to fail because they don't really have someone to go to help them. They're kind of the last stop, and if it's not their skill set, that they could be in over their heads. So I think this is a role that a lot of B2B companies should go out, maybe even spend money on a recruiter, get someone like really qualified. It's probably not going to be the cheapest hire that you make, but I think it's going to be worth it, and it's going to save you a lot of headache, in my opinion, if you just get a good person.
Well, I would echo that, and I'd say that personally, I've taken on roles like this, and sometimes I've been brought in as a consultant, then hired, or I've been brought as a consultant to help hire who's going to take on that role, long term. And again, I think Isaiah did hit that on the head. It's not necessarily the most expensive role you're going to hire, but it's a pretty critical one. So you need to have someone who has a lot of these, attributes, who really understands, as I put it, how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. That's a key, factor to success here. It's not just, somebody who knows B2B e-commerce in general. It's really how somebody can help you move your business forward and understand where these agencies and partners and other components might work and how you really move ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, so let's keep going. I think we can kind of come back to some of this stuff because we have more time today, which is nice. We kind of had to rush through this presentation the other day. So.
That's right. That's right. We did. We had to squeeze this in, folks. We had to squeeze this into 30 minutes, which was really tough because it's so many great topics, and we're going bam, bam, bam. So now we have a little time to slow it down. So go for it.
So yeah, we wanted to kind of. So the next step is like, okay, so. Hopefully you've picked your platform or platform. So it's maybe like an e-commerce platform, like a Magento or BigCommerce or Insite or Salesforce or one of those, popular B2B e-commerce platforms. And then you have your ERP most likely, like an Infor or NetSuite or whatever it may be. So you have your systems. Maybe it's also hopefully Punch Out To Go, our sponsor. You have your internal guy. You've hired the guy. He's the guy that you believe in. And he's your e-commerce manager, or whatever title that you think is best for this to run the project. And you've maybe got an agency to help you out, or you're going to handle it internally. Then what are you doing, right? How do you approach this? And I think we've tried to distill it into like, the reason I wanted to simplify it into like 5 steps in terms of order of steps is I think one of the problems that I see is that a lot of companies, they think, okay, now we got to do e-commerce. So we got to do it all at once. Like we got to do all 5. You could potentially do these steps kind of in order and focus on each step at a time and kind of like agile build out your site. So, and I'll kind of talk a little bit more about that since we have more time. But the idea behind these 5 steps is that you could focus on each one at a time. Once you've kind of perfected step 1 or got step 1 into a good place, you can put more effort into step 2. Once you've got step 2 in a good place, you can put more effort into step 3, and so forth. And obviously, you're going to have to do a little bit of all of these steps at once to get a site up and running. But I think there's importance to prioritizing them, because if you try to kind of do them all too much at once, it might be too expensive for the initial project, and it might take 3 years instead of get something up and running that's good with maybe step 1 and 2 and a little bit of step 3, and then you can do step 4 or 5 after you go live.
Well,
So
if I have unlimited money as a client, Isaiah?
If you have unlimited money, then great, just do all 5 steps. If you have unlimited money,
I just wanted to make sure we all understood.
If you have unlimited money, pay me a couple $1 million and we'll do whatever you want. It'll be amazing. But most people don't have a $2 million budget or even a $1 million budget. You might only have a $100,000 budget or a $200,000 budget or whatever, even a $50,000 budget. So chances are your budget's probably not high enough to do all 5 of these steps at the level that you want to be doing in the future. So that's why we kind of organize them in a way to prioritize. So step 1 is product data. And the way that I would envision step 1 is, in theory, you could build a great site, maybe use a default theme. Most of the platforms have a theme that you can install, put in your branding. You don't have to necessarily spend a ton of money on design. and complex features in the beginning, you could get a B2B site up and running with product data that at least has value. Your customers can see the product data, they can go and search and find what they want, maybe buy and check out. Maybe it's a simpler B2B experience to start. Without the product data, the site's useless. Like, you have to have product data up and running on your site in a quality manner. Otherwise, they can't, they're going to call in. You want, the whole point of the site in B2B commerce is to be a tool so that people can order and self-serve and facilitate, commerce for yourself or for your B2B business. And if they're like, oh, this product's not on the site, but they know you have it, then they're going to call you up. And then all of a sudden the site's kind of useless, right? Because now they're calling you again, and which is still fun. You want people to call you and talk to you, but they should be able to find the products easily and at least know that you have them on the website. So that's step one. And that is usually one of the hardest steps for B2B because they got all their data in ERP. They're not used to consumer facing data. And you basically have to completely transform your data to almost like consumer level e-commerce data, because that's kind of what people expect when even though you're a business buying, you want that consumer like experience from like a product page and to see all the facts and details about the product. And then you have to organize it into a unified taxonomy and aggregate all this data that might be coming from different manufacturers if you're a distributor, or you have to create the data if you're a manufacturer. So there's a lot of challenges here, and usually your ERP data is not really designed for this. So you might need to invest in a PIM platform that's separate from e-commerce, or just use your e-commerce platform more like a PIM to do all of this. So there's a lot to take in here, but that's kind of where I would really focus in the beginning and get this to a really good place. So we could probably spend all day talking about. We probably do have just an episode on product data, but
I think we can, maybe a couple episodes. There's a lot to talk about there.
Yeah, honestly, there really is. But for sake of time, we're gonna keep going. Yeah, step two. So let's assume now you're through step one. You got a basic site up that has great product data. I can search. I can, add stuff to my cart, and maybe have your basic checkout, and I can buy it. Right? Great. Technically that's a working B2B e-commerce site, right, Tim? Would you agree with that?
I would agree with you on that.
Yeah. Step one is you can buy stuff on the site, and obviously I'm assuming that you've done your basic setup of credit card, payment gateway and shipping info and things like that. Step two is, once you've got kind of your basic e-commerce up and running on a platform with all the product data, is then most likely you're going to need to integrate the data with other systems. So that's another big challenge we see in B2B. Most B2B companies, and obviously there are exceptions, need some sort of ERP system, order management system, some other back office systems to run their operations. And this is where I think things get really challenging, because these systems weren't necessarily designed for e-commerce, right? And I'm sure you've seen this, Tim, where they have some 30-year-old ERP system. I think we had a guest that was talking about their ERP system was built before she was born, and she.
Yes, it was before she was born, and she was relatively young, but still, the idea that you're working with a system that exists, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So some of these systems are really, really old. Some of them are newer, and some, hopefully you're on a newer ERP system. But even if you're on a new ERP system, it's still complicated to integrate it into e-commerce, because the systems are different. They have different data types. They have different, methodology and ways of doing things. So an order in ERP system is a little bit different than the way an order works in e-commerce. So syncing these systems can be very challenging. So the things that I would focus on integrating first, and obviously there's more that you could integrate, would be products and pricing, making sure your pricing is accurate. Ideally, you want to have pricing controlled in one system, and usually that's the ERP. So the ERP is your master price list for all your customers. Maybe you have a different price for every customer, and obviously that's really complicated. So then you want to have that sync up to the e-commerce platform, or in some cases what we've done that's made this much easier is it just displays the price from the ERP. So the e-commerce platform, or with headless, it's actually even easier to do this. Basically it just kind of looks up the customer and says like, hey, this customer is customer XYZ in the ERP. So we're going to display price, B for this customer, because we know it's this special customer that has this special pricing from the ERP. So that's one way to do it, or you could potentially, sync up the pricing into the e-commerce platform, and you want to have some sort of basic product sync so that like products are, coming over. And obviously when have orders, hopefully people are placing orders online, that's being passed over, and the product data is syncing up with what's in your ERP. So the SKU number should match, and there should be some level of product data syncing, even if it's just very basic at like a SKU and price level and maybe inventory level. So obviously you need to have your orders and fulfillment synced up so that when the order gets placed in the ecom platform, the problem is your fulfillment's probably happening out of your ERP, right? So now you're like, oh, well, great, we have this order in our ecom system, but now we got to go manually put it into our ERP. So you want to take out all those manual processes and make this as much of a real-time integration as possible between orders and fulfillment, customers, inventory and availability, and taxes and totaling. So these are the kind of the main areas I would focus on first. You might have some specific nuances to your business, and there's other things like returns and some other nuances that you could probably get to after you get these done. But these are kind of the key ones that we see.
One thing I would say before we leave this, this topic is that, early on, I'll say 3 to 5 years ago again, since we kind of use that, I remember going into some businesses and saying, okay, we're going to go through an exercise and we're going to talk about everything your customers have to do manually. And then we're going to go through everything that you have to do manually internally, right? And we'd go through this list, and it was an astounding number of things. It really was. It's like, well, this step to this step, to this step, to this step, or where things just didn't connect, right? So for a while, even not necessarily about B2B e-commerce, it was really just saying, well, how many of these things can you eliminate that are manual before you even get to e-commerce, right? So the idea of having setting up the B2B e-commerce, environment first and then coming to the integrations really does make a lot of sense as a step two, because, for a long time, these integrations, there wasn't anything to integrate on the other side, right? There were so many manual processes that were still taking place. Now, at least I have some confidence when I go into a business that a lot of those manual processes, many of them, have kind of evaporated, or things have gotten more, operationalized in a real digital way, and they need to be connected to the e-commerce, right, as opposed to creating everything from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think you make a good point, is sometimes it is good to just go through your manual workflow, and that's a good exercise to do, to then see, okay, what of this what here can we automate? Maybe you can't afford to do all of these integration points in the first project. We're big believers in agile at Trellis and in this podcast. So maybe you just need to integrate, orders and fulfillment first, and then you do the rest. So look at kind of the areas that are taking up the most manual time, and if you can integrate those first, you're probably gonna get the most value.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that'll make our listeners laugh, and then I'll let you continue. One of the places I worked years ago was a CPG company called Nature's Bounty, right? And Nature's Bounty is still enormous, vitamin supplements, all this. They have direct-to-consumer businesses. At that time, they had an internal call center, all this stuff. But they had 13,000 employees, many of whom were in one location in New York. And they had these gigantic warehouse-like spaces, all these different things going on. They actually had people on roller skates. I want to point this out. They actually had people on roller skates, and this is in the early to mid 2000s, whose job was to bring certain things back and forth because they hadn't digitized those processes yet. So it sounds like a comedy skit, but this is a company making billions, had 13,000 employees, and they still had people doing that. When I was there, it's astounding.
Well, I'm going to guess that they've done some automation around that stuff
They
at this
have
point.
done a tremendous amount of sense. It probably doesn't exist at all anymore, except as a joke. But it really was let's say around 2000, 2005, they were still doing that.
That's funny. But yeah, so, I think that manual exercise of just thinking about what are you doing manually, and then saying, okay, this is taking up the most time, let's integrate that first and automate that, and kind of, chip away at these manual processes one by one is a great way to look at this. And it might also help you realize, hey, we actually need this other thing too, because we have, this special thing that we do for our business. Because that's another challenge in B2B, is that it's usually just a lot more nuanced and complicated than B2C. You might have some special things that make you unique that are just different and more complicated in terms of processes. So step three, user experience is very important. I absolutely believe you should invest a lot of money into user experience, but I don't necessarily think if you have limited money, that's why I kind of think it's more of a step three thing, because I've seen companies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on design, and then like you can run out of budget. Like I've seen companies, you can spend all your money on design, but then it's useless if you can't afford to build it and integrate and do all the actual operations to make it a useful live website. So that's why I think it's something that you kind of want to prioritize maybe a little bit more down the road. So maybe if you have limited money, you might kind of do like, a nice template. There's a lot of really great templates out there. So I think that's kind of what we recommend is if you're, limited on what you can accomplish in phase one, maybe step one, maybe your initial user experience is based off a template, and then you kind of learn what your customers want and you revamp it or you invest in making it a better user experience. So if you got to step three and you're ready to really, work on the user experience and get it to the next level, the way I would think about it is this for B2B e-commerce. How easy is it to shop, right? So and what I mean by that is shopping is a little different than searching. Searching, it's like, I know I want, SKU XYZ, or I want this exact thing. Shopping is more like, I'm interested in this B2B company. They have a lot of products, but I don't know exactly what I want. I'm just kind of clicking around. I want to be able to drill down and filter and kind of play around with different ideas, maybe build a wish list or requisition list, as they call it in B2B. And so shopping is kind of more like that, as if you're shopping in person, right? You're walking around, you don't necessarily know exactly what you want. You're checking all the aisles. You're doing that on the e-commerce site, right? You're clicking on the categories, you're filtering, you're adding to cart. You're just kind of playing around with the website. How easy is that experience? And obviously, I think when you go to Amazon, it's a pretty good experience, right? It's pretty fast. It's pretty easy to find stuff. It's pretty easy to click around. How do you stack up in that regard? Search is obviously another big one, and that's more targeted. Maybe you know exactly what you want. You might know the SKU number or the name or the brand, and what comes up. How accurate is the search? How effective is the search? So there are a lot of search tools that you can integrate. This is almost more of a functionality thing that kind of ties in to user experience, but there are a lot of cool tools. We're partnered with companies like SearchSpring, Klavu, Algolia, some of these like kind of modern search technology companies that can help you with this. And then how easy is it to sign up and manage your account? A lot of people, I think, neglect this. They get too caught up on the home page or the product page, and those are important pages. Don't get me wrong, the home page is important or the product page is important, but if your accounts suck and it's so annoying to sign up and it takes forever and it's just not a good process, that can cause just as much issues as your homepage not being great, right? So I think that a lot of people forget about these things that aren't like the front-facing part of your website.
Oh, I agree. And one thing I would even add in here or emphasize in here is that, user experience also includes mobile.
Oh, absolutely.
B2B e-commerce, is not a desktop only venture as people used to think. It no longer is, obviously. And people and your customers want to do as much as possible mobile. So, what is that user experience, even for something simple like signing into your account and reviewing previous orders or placing a reorder or just, looking up, whether you have the right email addresses or whatever, anything in there that has to be easy, mobile, for B2B e-commerce. It can't just be something you think about, fifth or sixth or seventh, right? It has to be, something that's a higher priority.
Absolutely. So all of these things are kind of the experience, right? But how are these things on mobile, right? Is it can I sign up for a company account on mobile, which is usually a little more complicated, right? Because you're like company information, but maybe I'm on the go or I'm on I'm traveling and I just want to, I need some supplies for some job I'm doing. Can I sign up for this, company account on mobile? And can I manage my account? And then that kind of ties into reordering. Like when I log into my account, can I easily reorder? There's a lot to account pages. I mean, you can do a lot with account pages, and I think that's something that the big e-commerce sites do really well. Is if you go to a big e-commerce site and log into your account, there's so much stuff. Like, I don't know if you've ever just taken the time to look around at your Amazon account. It's like pretty overwhelming. There's so many things that they can do.
I
It's
have.
it's like ridiculous. You don't necessarily need to have all of that, but I think it's something that you want to put effort into from a user experience standpoint. And then obviously the reordering, there's a lot to reordering. It could be as simple as reordering the same stuff. It could be more nuanced things like a quick order, or kind of looking at your past orders and maybe adding certain SKUs to a cart from your past order and then adding new SKUs. So kind of creating like a new order that's based off an old order. Just kind of making it easier to buy again. Because with B2B, I think you're going to see it's more about recurring purchases, right? Like, with B2C, it's a lot of new acquisition. You want that acquisition, but with B2B, if anything, you want to just grow your accounts, right? Like, there's a lot of, I think, growth within your own account
Oh,
potentially.
very much.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I mean, there are differences, of course, depending on exactly, if it's B2B products versus services and whatnot. But I think that really there is much more of a focus on growing the account. If you're for example, I talk with somebody who does facilities planning, and when you're doing facilities planning, let's say like senior communities, and you're buying like 300 of everything for a senior community, you want to do reorders that are really simple, that are really clear, that are not going to be confusing. And if there's some addition, it's got to be something you just drop in. It's not going to be something that's overcomplicated where you're calling or faxing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then, that kind of, I mean, reordering and checkout are very similar, obviously, but what I mean by checkout is, what's that experience like? Payment, do I have lots of payment options? Maybe I want a purchase order. Maybe I want, one thing that we see that I think companies really struggle with in B2B is a lot of things are done on a credit limit. So they say, okay, you have $100,000 credit limit, purchase order, and once you hit that, you got to pay down, right? Like, if you spend 100,000 and you haven't paid us, you've hit your limit, right?
Hmm.
So you might need to integrate that in from the ERP so that they can use their credit limit on the website. And these are some of these nuanced kind of like checkout functionality features that B2B customers might expect. And then you have newer tools like Approve, which is a guest that we had on, a payment method that you might be able to use, or some of these payment plan tools that are kind of getting more and more modern.
Hmm.
And then obviously, some people might still want to just use credit card, or just more basic purchase order stuff. And there's just so many different payment methods now, right? So people want, and
Well,
then,
and I
yeah.
think that you're talking about that in the next slide. And one of the things I would add about that too is that it's also the combination. Again, like this is like B2C. Sometimes when a large order for B2C, you want to be able to split it. Put it in this credit card and this credit card or what have
And
you.
that's a very good point. Yeah.
And that's something that B2B didn't really think about, online again until very recently. And now if it is that large order and you've hit your credit limit and you want to use a business credit card in there and something else, you should be able to do that pretty seamlessly.
Absolutely. So flexibility and checkout, and then shipping is a whole nother. One problem I see in B2B all the time is they're like, yeah, well, we don't tell you the shipping costs until after you place the order. And I think that's a big mistake. People
Mhm.
want to know what they're going to pay for shipping when they buy, just like in B2C experience. Like, typically it's either free, which is obviously a little harder to do in B2B when you have these bigger orders, or if it's a bigger order. But if you can figure out a way to integrate freight shipping, or some sort of sophisticated shipping algorithm, or real-time rates from the shipping providers, or maybe it's your own shipping and that's your competitive advantage, and you charge for it or you don't charge for it. Like, you need to have, I think, logistics built into the checkout experience in a way that people kind of know when they're getting it. And that's part of the user experience.
Exactly. You don't want to be told that you're going to be called by, the freight company with an estimate, and it's $16,000, right?
And then like charged separately, and it's like, how do you even pay for that?
You don't want to be told that. You want, if at all possible, you want to know these things up front.
Absolutely. And then once you've purchased, there's all the tracking. And I think that's another big misstep, is that people forget. It's like, I want those notifications. I want to know my order's been shipped. I want to know where my order's at. And people want that. I think we're moving towards that Uber-like experience, and that's what people expect. So literally, I want to see where my car's at and how close it is to me. And that's kind of like, the closer you can get there with, once you've purchased, what that experience is like, I think the better off you will. So I think in some ways more is better here. Obviously, don't want to spam the customer, but keeping them up to date around what's going on, or at least so when they log in, they can see where their order's at.
Exactly.
Because it's nothing's worse than placing a big B2B order and then being like, am I going to get this? Am I going to get this $50,000 order that I just placed? Or is so moving on, we talked already a little bit about this with the checkout. So there's just so many options out there. I think a big one of the platforms on our podcast earlier is actually doing a lot with subscription. And I think that's a big like, there's so many opportunities in B2B e-commerce, right? Like, how many B2B e-commerce companies are doing a lot of subscription? You could probably revamp and even grow your business model online with subscription by making some sort of like flexible subscription models for businesses, that maybe I need paper towels every 3 months, or I need toilet paper every 3 months if I have a big facility, and I don't want to have to waste a bunch of time remembering to do that every month or couple months or whatever it may be. So I think there's just so much opportunity within payment methods and making it easier for people to pay you, right? You want to make people pay you in a streamlined fashion, and if you make it hard for them to pay you, you're less likely to get paid, right?
That's what is. I mean, remember, it is business, right? Business to business, e-commerce, and so people want to get paid, but also remember why these other businesses are getting things from you. They're also in business, right? So they're trying to generate revenue. It's this big cycle. So everything has got to run as smoothly as possible, and gives everyone the opportunity to make even more money more quickly. So the subscription piece is such a valid point. It's also not complicated when you think about the technology of it. It's already there.
It's been
And
around for a long time,
been around for a really long time. It just hasn't been done as much as it should be. But the tech is there, and it's something that we all need to consider.
Absolutely. Another point that I think is interesting, and this is kind of one of those more advanced features that we haven't done as much as I'd like of this, but we're moving more in that direction with our customers on the B2B side at Trellis, is getting them to start to adopt the credit limited purchase order functionality, so that you could potentially even pay down. Let's say you purchased with a purchase order and now you owe 10,000 or 20,000. You could go back and log in and pay that down on the website. So it's truly self-serve. I get my credit limits on the website, and I can pay it down on the website, whether it's with an ACH transfer or some sort of bank transfer or credit card. So that's where we're seeing a lot of people moving in that direction. And I think that's where people should move, so that, you can just, if I want to pay at midnight because I'm on my bed and I'm just, with my computer doing business for whatever reason, I can do that. I don't have to wait till 9 to 5 to call up the company or, pay an invoice.
Exactly. I mean, the process, again, if everyone can remember this even from just a few years ago, having to call up somebody who works in accounting or finance at a particular company and then wait for replies and all these things to cycle around and wait for authorizations. And, it's just, no one has that time or has that patience, or the expectation is different now. So it really is something that anything you can do to reduce those types of friction are going to just put more money in your pocket.
Yeah.
Put more.
And if they do have to do that, they're going to get frustrated, and it's going to be a bad experience, and it's going to take up a lot of their time. And they're going to say, maybe I can find another competitor that can do this, where I don't have to, waste all that time on hold to do something that I can just do online in 2 minutes.
Exactly. I'm all for that.
Yeah. So the next step is one that I think a lot of B2B companies also don't think about as much as they maybe could. Definitely it's becoming more common, but What's challenging with B2B is you have all these different third parties that maybe aren't even your own systems. And that's where it gets, I think it can get really complicated, which is why I kind of say it's step 5. Like this is kind of one of the more advanced steps. Like, let's say you got step 1 through 4 done, you have a great site. You still, and this is why this step is so important on step 5, is that you still, and we still see this where people still might not have enough adoption because, and I think it was one of our last guests talk about how this is a really important feature for them, making sure that they could improve this on their re-platform, is that the companies want to be able to buy through their procurement systems or have it all synced up. So when they buy on, B2B site XYZ, it syncs up with their ERP inventory, or there's kind of a syncing between the two systems, however they're ordering, so that, and this could be done in very many different ways, and it might be client specific, so that they can basically, they don't have to double enter orders. So they place the order on the e-commerce system, or even internally on their own ERP system, and then it triggers an order on their own system or your system. So basically, like, what you're trying to accomplish here is getting rid of the double entry so that your customers, when they place an order through your website, or even they could potentially even place one through their own ERP, they don't have to go back and enter the data in again. And this is a common objection that we see, is like, well, I could place the order on your website, but then I have to go and put all the order data into my own ERP system, and they don't want to do that. And then they just end up what happens is they might end up sending an email in as an order and putting it into their own system, because it's faster than them having to place the order on the website and then put it back into their e-com system. So basically, you're trying to save them time, right? You're trying to save third party, your clients, time. And then I would go a step further with that, and that we're doing this with some of our customers, where you might be getting data, like product data is a good example. Like maybe you get product data from your manufacturers. Potentially, you could integrate that directly into your website so that it automatically updates the product data in real time, so that you don't have to manually update the product data every time the manufacturer updates it.
That would be nice.
Yeah, that's definitely more advanced. It's definitely something this is kind of why this is step 5. It's not necessarily, you don't have to do that, but I think it's as you get more sophisticated, there's potentially a lot of value in doing that, and it could save a lot of time so that your people can do marketing, and they're going to be happy not, putting spreadsheets into the website.
Well, and I know we're moving along in a bunch of things, but again, this is sort of a weird little lesson, right, of the way things used to work and might still work, but don't have to be like that anymore. Because the whole idea of like the carbon copy, the CC in email, came from that whole idea in paper, like documents that people would have, where let's say engineering changed something in a product, or a place where you were getting your a component of your product from, right? And then they would have to CC, they would have to carbon copy all these different teams so that they would update their systems, right? And it's mind-boggling to think that that actually worked, for a really long time. But it's not even necessary now, right? That's the thing that's so astounding, is that we've gotten to a point that none of this is necessary. You can find all these linkages and all these ways of connecting that will allow something to be entered in conceivably once, and then updating and updating and updating everywhere else that needs to be updated, to streamline and allow it
Exactly.
to sell more and make more.
And that it's in its simplest form, it's that simple, right? Like, it doesn't make sense to have to double enter data into many different systems. You enter it into one system, and then that data goes to the other systems that maybe need that data. And what's challenging, I think, with B2B especially, is that oftentimes those are systems that are not your own, right? So we talked about step 2, which is internal integration. So you have, ecom, you have your Magento or whatever it is, BigCommerce, and then you have your ERP systems. Those are your systems, right? Like, you own those systems, but you don't own your client's ERP. You don't own your manufacturing's product data feed, or, I've seen all sorts of different manufacturing product feeds. Like, some are in XML, some are in JSON, some are, maybe they have a sophisticated PIM. You know what I mean? Like they're all, some are in spreadsheets I've seen, obviously. So you don't own the third-party systems, but oftentimes your data and their data need to sync up in some way. So it's definitely, I think, one of the more challenging steps. And this is where I think an iPass, like a Sligo, who's obviously one of the guests that's been on this podcast, and there are other iPass solutions out there, but that's where that kind of technology might be really valuable. Or Punch Out to Go, obviously. I think Punch Out to Go is
or our sponsor.
Yeah. Sorry, you should probably have said that right away. Punch Out to Go is probably one of the first places you should look in terms of integrating with your client ERP systems and third parties. But some sort of iPaaS technology is a good place to start, I think, in terms of making this a little bit more streamlined and better managed than trying to just kind of wing it and go custom, you know. But yeah, so hopefully this is a good summary. There's a lot of other nuances and other things that go into B2B e-commerce, but we kind of wanted to distill it down into 5 key steps. And if you have questions about other stuff, we're happy to answer that offline.
This is great, Isaiah. And, you know, the other things that we were talking about, you know, when we were saying, like, what have we learned? You know, some of those are lessons that are marketing, but that's what season 2 is about for, you know, our wonderful podcast, right? We're spending a little bit more time on marketing as well. So, you know, we learned an awful lot, you know, in season 1 over those first 20 or so episodes. But really, we're diving into you know, a whole other area too, to kind of, you know, educate ourselves, update ourselves, and to you know, pass that knowledge on to our listeners.
Absolutely. Right? And I think that's the problem too, is that, you know, just steps 1 and 5, which is a lot of what we've been doing in the podcast in season 1, is just learning about that and educating people about that. And once you get that up and running, you still got to market the site. Now you have to market the site. So step 6, I guess you could say, is marketing, right?
So let's talk about marketing, right? So
yeah,
that's absolutely true.
And I think B2B marketing is challenging because it's different, right? I mean, you've talked about that a lot.
It is. I mean, and what I can do is, you know, I can kind of touch on this, but again, I want to stress to folks, you know, you should be tuning into our Wednesday drops of each episode, because we're tackling, you know, different angles of this all season. Really, this is what we're focusing on now, kind of in depth. But really, you know, B2B does need different marketing. You know, to remind folks, I've done both. I've done B2C and I've done B2B, both on the brand side and the agency side. And there are similarities. You know, there are customers and there are different digital tools like paid ads and things that we're using across. But there are a lot of things you consider in B2B that you don't think about otherwise. Things like sales enablement. You have sales teams of products and services on B2B that you don't really have in the same way unless you're like Amway or Mary Kay on you know, the B2C side. And those are really blended companies in their own way too, right? So we have all of these things that are, you know, areas to consider. How are leads generated, right? Where do they come from? How are we getting them? How are we processing them? How are we understanding them and bringing them ahead into actual sales? How are we doing account management? You know, instead of just taking an order, how can we be more strategic and grow those accounts? As Isaiah mentioned earlier, you know, it is a major focus of B2B to work with an account and to build it and to understand what their needs are and to kind of, you know, help each other out and grow. And that's not the same kind of relationship most of the time with your B2C relationships for any category. It's not as deep, it's not as strong. And also, just to be very blunt, the money is not the same. You know, the scale of it is different. You can have, you know, your B2B customers spending hundreds of thousands or millions per customer. And that very rarely happens on the B2C side. You know, that's only the top 10th of a percent, you know, of your B2C customers.
Yeah, maybe a house if you include buying a house. But
if you include buying a house, but also you're not doing that necessarily that often. And your B2B customers, there's always there's a cadence. There's stuff that's happening, you know, regularly. So all of these things that are happening, including under different types of analytics, because you have different types of data. coming from multiple sources that you wouldn't necessarily have in a B2C situation. And also just the process of understanding retention. How are you keeping all of these folks happy? What is your retention marketing plan? It's different. It's not loyalty cards. It's not giving points like coffees at Starbucks. It's a very different kind of approach. Although I would say that as a B2B customer, I wouldn't mind getting free coffee from Starbucks. So maybe there's something there that we can, figure
Yeah.
out.
And I think that's where the loyalty might be more like negotiated pricing,
Exactly.
or maybe it's a better credit limit. Maybe, hey, now, you got $100,000 credit limit, but you're a great customer. You always pay your bills. You pay down your credit limit. We're going to give you a $200,000 credit limit to buy, purchase orders, and, you have 90 days to pay us or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, those kind of net terms, and trust is established as kind of like loyalty when you have a customer that you kind of trust to pay you and do business with. And I think it's kind of a different, more negotiated loyalty, I guess.
It is a different, that's a great term, actually, a more negotiated loyalty where it could be, I want access to the newest products in this category, right? And then that's something that you provide to them because they're that good a customer. So it could be very different from the kinds of things you do for a regular consumer. If you don't mind advancing, the other thing to bring up here too is that marketplaces matter for B2C, but there are different marketplaces or different considerations for B2B. Obviously the big players like Amazon and eBay do matter. Walmart matters, but there are also these other opportunities like Newegg, Best Buy, Alibaba, AliExpress. I've talked before to others about where you get component parts for various things, or when you're a manufacturer and you make certain types of products, but you don't make all of the component pieces, where do you get them? Well, you often go to these marketplaces that are set up for B2B, where you're figuring out how to get 1,000 units of this and 1,000 units of that, and where do they, meet, in which warehouse, and how does that get put together? It's different. And that's stuff that you've got to consider. Also, understanding marketplace ERPs like Channel Advisor can be, great partners, and the whole international aspect. You're not necessarily working just in the U.S. Period. It is a global, marketplace. B2B has to look wherever it makes sense, and you have to have an international outlook often.
And I think Brian Beck's talk that we saw the other day was pretty amazing. I mean, what did he say? Amazon was going to be at 53 billion. Do you remember that slide
Well,
where
the number was enormous. It was
it was
absolutely enormous.
it was going to be, I think, 50 something billion B2B sales on Amazon. B2B, not B2C, B2B sales on Amazon by like 2023 or something. So in the next few years, Amazon is going to be a massive B2B player. And obviously Alibaba is very focused on B2B. I mean, Lowe's and Home Depot, a lot of contractors and small businesses buy from Home Depot and Lowe's. So, a lot of these other things are going to be marketplaces that you need to kind of get out there on. And I think, like Brian Beck said, if you want someone that really knows the marketplace, he's a great guy to talk to. But it's a good way to kind of get your brand out there, because people might be finding your business through the marketplaces, and then maybe you still have you build a relationship off of that somehow. But
It's marketplaces, and I work extensively in this for B2C, but I have to tell you, marketplaces are one of those. They're confusing to a lot of people, but they're great for volume, and they're great for connections you couldn't make otherwise. And there are a lot of things that can be positive about a marketplace. I mean, you can't get like when I'm talking about 1,000 pieces of something. How do you get these except through different marketplace transactions? And also, you as a business putting things out in a marketplace, the visibility can be absolutely extraordinary that you just wouldn't be able to get otherwise.
yeah,
And those are both big
and I
positives.
think you can make it effective where people will still find you on your website. One of the things, for instance, I bought a product that I really like on Amazon, and then I ended up looking up the brand to just kind of, I was kind of curious to see what they had. And I found out that their website was actually a little bit cheaper to order on their website, which makes sense because they don't have to pay the Amazon fees, right? So it was a little bit cheaper, and they had subscription on their website. So I ended up using the subscription. They didn't have subscription on Amazon. So I ended up kind of converting from Amazon, finding the brand. I started buying on Amazon and then ended up becoming a subscription customer on their website. So you can do this with marketplaces, if you do a good job on your website and maybe have something unique or different or something that maybe they wouldn't get on the marketplace. I think that's a way to kind of make it, because I think a lot of the thing that scares B2B companies is like, oh, if I sell in the marketplaces, then I'm all in on the marketplaces, and and I'm just selling to the marketplaces, and I'm kind of like losing my brand, right? And I think that's what scares a lot of people. And there's a lot of ways to do it so that doesn't happen, I think.
There are, and I have to say, it's funny how quickly things change, because my view earlier on was that it was risky to be on a lot of these marketplaces. I no longer feel that way. I feel like it is something that is a component of almost any approach that you take. That you need to do it, you just need to do it right.
Exactly. And hire a consultant. There's lots of people that can help you with that. So
And
definitely.
and now we're getting to I think our wrap up here. This is really such a great way to wrap this up. But let's talk about Trellis. All right, let's talk about what Trellis says. Trellis does make B2B e-commerce simple, because all of these things that we're discussing here, everything that we're covering, that we've been learning, together, and sharing with all of our different guests on the hard truth about B2B e-commerce, kind of lead to this concept, right? That we need to simplify things. And what is Trellis trying to do? They are trying to do this. They're trying to simplify B2B e-commerce, with a very, I would say it's a rare approach at this point. Maybe other people will take the same approach, but it's really about, being agile combined with the long-term planning, the long-term strategic thinking. It really is a focus that people don't necessarily have these combined. Maybe that's the best way that I've described it.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, is that people kind of think that if you go agile, you can't be long-term thinking. So there are ways to combine it. So you can think about your 5-10 year roadmap, and obviously 10 years is tough, right? But let's say you think about your 3 to 5 year roadmap. Maybe you want to get through step 5. We did this 5 steps. You want to get through step 5 and step 6, which we'll call step 6, the marketing side. And that's your 5-year roadmap, but you probably aren't ready for doing all of that at a very expert level, all in your first project. So maybe we do steps 1, 2, and 3 as the MVP, and then we use kind of agile methodology to chip away at step 4, 5, and 6, and the long-term plan that you've developed. And that, because it is important to have the long-term plan in mind when you're going agile, because if you're not, you could kind of go down an agile path that maybe puts you in a corner. You're like, oh crap, we built this thing that isn't really well designed for this new thing that we want to be doing in a couple of
Right.
years. So you want to be thinking about the long term and the big picture, so that when you're building things, especially technical things, it's built in a way that can scale. And a lot of that also helps make you choose the right platforms, right? Because sometimes people will choose a platform and then they find out it can't do certain things, or it's not good for certain things, because they didn't think about the long term
Yeah, I mean, we're,
plan.
the way, and again, it's funny because I think I'm so deep in this stuff, but sometimes I try to just describe it in new ways to people. And I was in a conversation with someone just the other day, and I said, look, it's not like we're telling you with the long-term thinking that you have to make all decisions right now. It's not that. Long-term thinking means that you have certain goals, certain places that you're trying to get to, and that you need to take an agile approach along the way and just keep rolling and rolling and rolling, and improve in all of these ways that we've been highlighting here in steps 1 through 6, that we've been discussing. It's not that you have to have it all figured out. Nobody has it all figured out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I think hopefully this will be valuable. We'll post the slides and the video up on YouTube. This was one of I think the only visually aided podcast so
It's the
far.
only one.
So we would love for you to check us out on YouTube, because that's definitely, we haven't been promoting that a ton, but we do post a lot of videos on YouTube. and hopefully that adds a lot of value. You can see me and Tim in person, in a visible format, not just on audio.
What could be better than that, right? So for all of our listeners, please come check us out. And if you're listening to us just on Spotify, come check us out on YouTube, and tell everybody else. You can go to TuneIn and Stitcher and Overcast and Apple and Google Podcasts, and you will be able to find us one way or another, the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce.
And share and tag our stuff on social media, and we will respond, or we'll tag you, and we'll get you guys, it's a great way to kind of get some personal branding out there if you want to tag us in.
Absolutely. And well, thank you all for listening, and thanks for another great episode.
Thank you.